always record something that doesn't suck. To start recording at like 7 a.m. so we're a little less cynical.
Funny is usually harder.
Funny's way harder. Video works, audio works.
It's $3,500 chair.
Woo!
Hello, and you are listening to the Think Big and Code Small podcast. My name is Dan Horton, and I am joined with my friend and co-host, Chris Westerhold. This episode is sponsored by Code Crafters. Welcome to this week's episode. Chris and I are diving into a hot debate. Is product architecture taking over for enterprise architecture? And spoiler alert, we don't see eye to eye on this one. Join us as we delve into the roles of enterprise and product architecture within the organization. We explore the need for coordination between these roles and platform thinking, discovery on how to strike a balance between the autonomy and the structure. We also tackle the misunderstandings that arise when enterprise architects, product architects, and solution architects all vie for control. And we delve into the importance of collaboration and alignment between these roles to avoid conflict and ensure that there's a cohesive approach to our designing and building of the systems. Finally, we introduce a fresh perspective on EA, or enterprise architecture, focusing on coaching and guiding rather than enforcing rules and putting in the old school structures that we are so well aware of with EA. It's going to be a good show. Let's get on it. I heard last week you had an interesting discussion with a client, and you asked me a good question that I didn't agree with you, which is awesome when we don't exactly agree 100% because it means we have good content.
You mean that we don't like everything? We're not in complete 100% lockstep on everything? That's pretty bizarre.
Yeah, because actually lots of times we are, but this one, no. This one we both have really good, not conflicting, but alternate ideas, I think I would say.
I think so. I think we're coming at things from a different direction.
Different experiences leading to it. Yeah.
We may have been in the same spot, which is a little interesting. And you know, to stop beating around the bush, I had an interesting conversation with kind of an older, larger enterprise company, and you know, talking to them about, you know, kind of developer experience and some other platform thinking and how really to just generally improve their engineering kind of operations. And we started getting into a talk about kind of general structure where you have things like, you know, your product group, you have things like enterprise architecture, you have your kind of engineering groups, and how all of that kind of could and should tie together. And, you know, I came up with, you know, kind of a statement where you did disagree with a little bit. And my statement was, if enterprise architecture is dead, then engineering has to be a product. And, you know, there's kind of a lot to that. And we've kind of taken things and broken it down. But I still stand by at least my version of that being true, but I think we're going to spend the next while kind of picking that apart.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good discussion, and it was definitely a good statement because though not a visceral response to it, I feel like because I did EA and I like EA as a role and as a concept for organizations, even though slightly outdated in a lot of what they do in some areas. The idea of, I guess it goes back to an old podcast you and I did actually, which was the product and development. Why don't they like each other?
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost the same thing, just at a different level, because now you're talking about product architecture or product design, and EA, which is business and architecture, right?
So I guess let's start with, how would you define enterprise architecture and kind of the value that it kind of brings to an organization?
So, well, that's a good question, right? Because enterprise architecture in itself is supposed to be helping to align the business strategy, the organization strategy along to IT, so that the decisions that are made and the things that are built, the tools, the strategy, the principles and practices maybe you're following, a lot of these things were supposed to align with the organization and help it to have some consistency for moving forward. The problems in a lot of that, though, is the thinking that originally came from it is not what most organizations did. When you think EA, though, for the same question, because I'm trying not to answer your question longer with a lot of my own frustrations of what it is, but it was supposed to help the organization for some, consistency and help IT to actually be more effective at what it was doing. Keeping in mind, it came out a long time ago, 68, I think or 65 even with the first time. And then it kind of renewed when we started creating frameworks like TOGAF and such. And it started getting more well-known and trying to figure out where it fit in an organization because there was a need at the time. But the need at the time was not for agile development. It was for waterfall and a lot of the things that happened around waterfall. So, and we should dive into some of those frustrations because there's things with very big misalignments, which is where, like you said, we might actually end up in the same place of agreement by the end of this discussion, just because my initial response was based off even old school thinking of what EA is and what it should be doing, but understanding also in organizations today, it doesn't actually fit.
Yeah. So when I think of enterprise architecture, I think there is, or I guess when I think of one of the challenges of enterprise architecture is they should be doing exactly what you're saying is, how do we structure things from a high level to be able to help the business operate. And I think that the one of the challenges that I've always seen is where does that start and where does that end?
Right.
Because when you go back, 50, 60 years, the concepts of products really didn't exist. At least not in the same way in the kind of the main. It wasn't a main type of thinking inside of an organization. And so when I think of business challenges and business strategy and having enterprise architecture aligned to that business strategy, that makes sense for some things. But once you start looking at an enterprise through the products and services that it tends to offer, I see a lot of challenges and problems that come from that very high level set of silos or groups or types of thinking.
Yeah.
And just for anybody that may not know, I come from more of a product background along with technology, and Dan comes from more of an architecture background. And so we're very much coming from this at a very different kind of view. But so when I think of enterprise architecture, I see it running afoul with a lot of the other things that come from being product centric.
Yeah. So I can't never use your quote. I like your one quote we just said twice already this morning, but it's 63% of all statistics are made up.
That's right.
So I want that on a t-shirt. We have to put that on one of our t-shirts on our shop. So I think we should sell that one. CIO Magazine had an article that I was reading, and I think it's actually a higher percentage, but they had said that 55% of clients are still using an old version of EA. And what that really means, and I think it's important for this discussion, is that enterprise architecture is seen as glorified asset management. Right? It's focused on cost cutting. The idea was originally EA was helping around older systems. Think mainframe. Right? Think data warehouse, think, data centers that we've built out. And we're trying to optimize our data centers. We're trying to optimize the products we're buying. Because back then you were buying IBM, you were buying SAP, you were buying Oracle, you were buying these big box, big corporate systems. You were buying in and it was costing a lot of money. You're either paying, MIPS on a mainframe, or you're paying some other kind of fees to use these systems. So you had to optimize, and you wanted to make sure you were optimizing and aligning to the needs of the business. So you weren't duplicating systems. You weren't duplicating effort and then paying money for this for no reason. But that's not what we need today, but that is what we were doing. So if an organization in that 55%, if an organization today is still following that model, that's why both of those poor group of people are frustrated and don't know how to help the business, but they're trying really hard. Because I get really frustrated when I hear people say, REAs aren't doing anything. Well, they're probably worked all to hell and trying to do a lot of stuff. It's just not what your organization needs. They're still following older models because they haven't found a way to use some of the newer models to help the org, right? Like they're creating diagrams still, and they're mapping out the IT organization, and they're trying to show you your duplication, and they're doing all these old steps we used to do, trying to help the org. But the org doesn't need cost cutting. The org needs innovation. And I think that's where the disconnect from even what we're talking about, that's where some of that disconnect comes in.
Well, and I would state it, I agree with what you said. I would just maybe restate things a little bit differently, or at least from a different point of view, is in the old kind of monolithic world that we used to live in, enterprise architecture made a lot of sense because, to your point, you're buying these singular things. And now almost all new things are moving towards this distributed kind of architecture and system design and everything else. And being able to map IT becomes a much more difficult problem. And it's a much more dynamic problem, especially when you start thinking about things like microservices and everything else. And, I see, or at least the root of the statement that I was saying is, instead of trying to kind of be the mapper of the world, there's more of a coordination and allowing for these individual products and systems and solutions, or whatever word you want to call for them, to be able to, move on their own, but be able to have that level of thinking to tie everything together.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with you, because at this point in time, we're moving everything to the cloud. You have all the microservices. You have all these other new techniques, I'll say, right? Techniques, methods, and ways that we're building software and designing, scalable systems and distributed systems. And in that, there's so many moving parts that it is a full-time job to go to try to keep up with all this. So instead of an EA group trying to manage all of that, it should be pushed down, and the teams that are working on these things should be managing that and communicating what they're doing and what they have. And it should be down at that level, which goes towards more like you're saying. If I have a product architect that's managing out the product itself and the modules and the components we're building, and they have that long-term vision and the strategy, then they can help drive that. Where the alignment needs to be is aligning back up as well as down to the team. So I don't disagree at all with the role, actually, in the conversation. When you asked the original question and I pushed back, it was more of, I don't think it replaces EA. I think each one has its own place in this on the ship going forward,
Well, and I think there is, enterprise architecture, I still think has a very good home. And when I think about engineering effectiveness inside of most organizations, and I wrote an article about this the other day, the enterprise and kind of organizational decisions have a humongous impact on everything below that. And when it comes to those types of systems and that enterprise level decision making, there's a ton of space there for optimization. And when I've seen a lot of enterprise architecture want to do is manage these low level, or what I would consider lower level, system design, and not these, enterprise level problems. It's like, yes, you could be making decisions on, even in a distributed world, thinking about cloud, you could be helping set architectural patterns to say, okay, well, if you're going to use X, Y, and Z, then here's a great way of thinking about doing it. And setting those types of patterns. And, if you're going to, even things like email systems, ticketing systems, if you hate yourself, all of these different kind of high level architecture.
No one should ever use a
patterns, or things like, even things like Kafka.
Yeah.
Okay, well, are you going to, how are you going to do your messaging? And, when I think of these bigger buckets, it starts to make sense. And, cause there's that enterprise architecture. You also mentioned product architecture, which is thinking that next layer down. Okay, well, I have this product or solution. How do I start to form a good architecture for a given product?
Right.
Well, there's also another gap there is, kind of this platform and system thinking. So like platform engineering. And because what I've seen in a lot of organizations that go down this kind of product architecture, solution architecture road is you end up duplicating lots of things. So you end up having multiple message buses. Like, we've been working with a client together on a couple of things, and they have every tool known to man because they look at things from a product architecture perspective. They also have enterprise architecture stuff, but the thing that I believe is missing there, and what I mean when I say, that engineering should be a product, is that kind of system and platform thinking. So instead of saying, hey, like each individual product, do you need some kind of event-based, kind of architecture?
Right.
Instead of them standing up their own and saying, oh, well, we're going to use RabbitMQ. We're going to use Kafka. We're going to use like old school service buses. Like,
I hope not.
Instead of that, you can now have a platform as a service that says, here is a way for you to be able to do messaging. Here are standards when it comes to what are your inputs? What are your outputs? And you can manage all of that.
Yeah.
And that to me is a gap that I still see in a lot of organizations.
So to your point there too, I just talked to a client that still had TIPCO, and I don't know if you ever had to deal with TIPCO, but I never wanted to see that again. And I felt bad for the guy as soon as he told me it was an environment, and I could read his face, and I knew he was upset too. It was like, how is this thing still alive? But to your point, I mean, there are people using different service buses. I think there's two things I want to do in here. One is I don't disagree with what you were saying. What I think needs to be thought through is that we used to have discussions, or we still have discussions on guardrails. So an EA group should be helping to create those guardrails so you can have autonomous teams, but they're still working within a certain structure. And I don't mean locked down like some groups do, where you can only use this, and this, and that's it. It's more of, it's kind of like being a business within a business, right? The EA group is figuring out the tools to help the teams be as effective as they can and as the best they can. Also looking at cost strategies for the organization. So they're still covering part of what they're doing. And then in that, I'm creating guardrails. And it says 99% of the time, these tools should work for what you're doing. If you don't find that this will fit your need because of X, then great, let's talk about it. Not let's go through an architectural review board. Not that this didn't take 6 months to figure this out. This should be agile and quick in a discussion and says, okay, great, let's spike it out. Let's test it. Let's move forward. But before we dive too much deeper in here, the product architecture part or product design, I think is important to touch on a little more, because we talked about EA. We really didn't talk about product as much. My understanding of product architecture is the designing or the architecture of a product's functional elements itself, right? The elements that get basically chunked out into the different interactions and the parts and components that the thing is going to be, whether it's physical or it's digital. And then we're using that to design both So the product offering itself, the things we're doing, the functionality it's providing is then chunked out into smaller things that should theoretically map back to a solutions architecture, and that architectural design underneath should map back and marry back up to that in a way that it allows us to create a good design for flexibility and agility of managing and maintaining and growing this system over time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is much more of what you could loosely define as a business level overview of what that product should look like.
Okay.
That then should translate into technical diagrams and everything else like that. But that to me is really where the problems start to come in. And because if you think about the organization of a given enterprise, you will find the product teams, you will find the EA teams, and then you will have your IT teams. Well, the challenge that I see happen in a lot of areas is the fact that a product team will have an associated kind of IT team or a development team that generally works on their product. Well, in a monolith, that works just fine. Because you can say, look, okay, you do all of my development. It's encapsulated in this thing. And, I can now build a roadmap and everything is going to work the way that I would expect. Well, in a more dynamic distributed system, it is no longer a one-to-one. It is now a one-to-many relationship where, okay, well, I have this product and now I have many different engineering teams that I need to work with. And there might be something around identity management. There might be something around whatever kind of thing you're doing.
Right. It could even be reusable services within the organization or a third party that we're working with, whatever. But it extends out beyond, like I said before, if you worked on an IBM system like WebSphere, I used to work on, everything I needed to do in WebSphere was in WebSphere. That's right. Once you were in there, you built your system. Now to your point, you were more maintaining it with the designer. Somebody was saying, here, the BA went, learned all these things. Here's all your new requirements. Right. We would design out what that was. We'd build the code to add that new feature. It was very specific in it. Today, you said, we could have 1,000 microservices running into some huge system or huge ecosystem that we've built or more, right? And now how do we manage all those components and designs and the visibility of even everything?
Well, and you now have an overlap between products in a way that becomes very interesting. So, for example, a e-commerce company may sell things on the web, which would be a product and have different sets of product managers. They may sell things through an iOS and Android app, which is a different product person, different engineering team that's building it. They may have some kind of a embedded system that can work with other people's procurement systems. Right. They may have vending machines that has a completely different
Best Buy with the terminals, and now you see makeup stores and different things, right? Like Sephora now they have in the airports, right? They have a terminal in there. That's going to be all API services back into some main system, right?
Yeah. So when you think about those are individual products from a business perspective, okay, here's kind of a multimodal way of selling our products.
Right.
Now, okay, well, you have these individual products that are now reliant upon sets of services in the background. Then who is the one that is managing and being able to build not only roadmaps, but have a set of services and an engineering product, i.e. we can go sell products.
Right.
And who owns that and make sure that is living up to the expectations of a given organization.
Well, and I think this is an interesting part of your statement you made, even more so now. So some of the the experiences I've had through my career is that everyone thinks they own more than they should instead of working together.
Of course.
So as soon as you tell somebody they're a product architect, right, they're going to try to architect a system. So there's a problem between that part of it. You have EAs that might be told that they're overarching all of IT. So now they believe they should own all the decisions at all the levels.
Yep.
Right. And then you have solutions architects that are going to fight with a product person because, again, you're trying to tell me how to do my job, or vice versa. Because if you're somebody like me who actually likes to design the system as well, I have my own ideas of how this thing should work. So we're probably going to butt heads in some spots, but, and I think that these gray lines that happen are what cause some of the misunderstanding even of these roles, like you're saying, right? Where does product fit in? Because when I think about designing out and managing the products, like you said, let's do the vending machine, right? Or if I'm doing that as a retailer, I expect you to understand, to tell me how the brick and mortar store is going to work, how the mobile site's going to work, how the e-commerce site's going to work. And now the new thing you want to roll out, which is maybe putting out that kiosk. What that should drive is two things in my mind. One is an EA group, if they're an agile EA group, should be built into the project. So they're iterative and they're working with everyone. They're in the feedback loops. They're getting the data and the information, and they're adjusting the recommendations that are being made for, like you said earlier, right? Where's the guardrails that I said, guardrails, right? And where do they fit into that model so that we make sure we're creating you the right tools and the right strategy for moving forward. And then the solutions design team or the development team should be looking at both of those to help the product team to build the tool that they see the business needs, and then follow the model to basically build out the best architecture and design for what they're building. Like, I think the three groups work in let's call it a triangle, right? And they work well together. But they have to work well. They have to know
what could we call something with 3 points? I'm not totally sure.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could an octagon.
Sure.
No, that's already taken.
I watched the guy on YouTube the other day who took one of those kids' toys with all the different shapes and realized that every shape also fit into the square. Yeah. So he sat there on the video going, ooh, the star, where do I put this?
Ooh, square.
And then he turned it sideways and it dropped into the square. And he took the circle and turned it sideways and it dropped into the square.
There's some people losing their minds over that as well.
Yeah. Oh, it was the funniest video.
But back to your point, like I think the biggest challenge that I have with that triangle is the fact that the one point of that triangle is no longer one point. Because if you have a product, like you have enterprise architecture, okay, which should be thinking about, how do I do Kafka better? Or how do I do messaging better, or whatever, like whatever example you want to use. Your product is, I want a vending machine. But the engineering product, in air quotes, is I want to be able to process an order. I want to be able to add new products. I want to be able to manage users, because if you think about, you spent a bunch of time in retail, and we've talked about this before, that, my in-store experience is completely decoupled from my online experience.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's not the same experience. And the way that happens is by thinking about these things as completely separate products. And if you don't have that unified view into what is a user of your service, then you end up with very disjointed things. And when I think of like EA, enterprise architecture, product or solution architecture, that only solves part of the problem. And that makes the assumption that your front-facing product and the systems underneath it are a one-to-one relationship.
And I don't think they are, though.
And they're almost never that way anymore.
And I don't think it can be. And I think this is again where I think it's perfect that you and I come from different angles. When you asked me to do that for a retailer, right? From my experience on that, I need to have, for I want to create personalization for that customer. I want a consistency of experience across all those different channels. I want you to be able to design out the best possible experience, but underneath, I don't and cannot have 4 different independent systems working. I have to figure out where there's consistency and reusability. So like when you talk about a payment system or personalization, the capabilities of the organization need to be mapped out by EA in a way that I can align them back to ownership in teams that can build out services, and those services become available to then bring up to the glass, right, to any of those experiences that are trying to be designed. So I think this is where EA does fit in, and it's more of a business architecture focus, and saying I need to align the capabilities that the business has or needs in each of the departments. So again, get some consistency of like who owns what, but in a way that when you go to design or create a system now for the kiosk or something else, a payment API is already available. Product APIs are already available. You know, I can get the copy from the website API already, and I can skinny it down for the interface you're using, but it's already there. I'm not recreating the wheel. So I think there's an importance in figuring out what that is in an organization, because I've often seen it wrong, and so have you, and it just causes anger and frustration. But if done well, the EA should be helping to drive what the landscape for IT is to help all that product work that's happening and help the business get what they're looking for.
I don't disagree with that. I mostly agree with that. The challenge or the pushback that I would give there that I see is enterprise architecture is generally looked at as a business modeling of capabilities, which is great.
Right.
And they want to help define technical architecture, which is fine. The challenge then comes from an operational perspective. So, say I am the product manager over the vending machine or whatever, and I need to make a change to support a new set of features that I have. Who do I go talk to make that happen? In the model that I hear you proposing, it's the EA, but most EAs that I've come across don't have the talent, skill, or ability. Talent's not the right word there. They don't have the product type thinking, right, to help to drive those better outcomes. It's like, okay, well, I need to do this. That's going to require changes to APIs. It's going to require this. It's going to require that. Oh, you want that as well? Oh, what is the actual use case? And there's a whole different set of skills that are necessary when designing what I would call technical products, right, versus trying to do architecture of systems.
Yeah, I think I'm not saying EA. EA shouldn't own that. EA should be helping to drive
the roles. Like the role definitions get tough because what do you want them to do, right? Versus what do you call them? Different
size organizations are going to have redundancy across some of these, and there's even some organizations where EA and the CTO might be the same person even. So roles are difficult, and that's even where it's like, as you probably the same as I, when you were searching and trying to find some variations of what these titles were doing, you came across ones that is like, I've never even heard of this title before. Like, what is this? I had the same. EA should be working from a business level and strategy. So in a retailer, I have a huge map for this. In a retailer, I can break out the capabilities of the organization where I know that if I want to do merchandising, and under merchandising, I might have product management of itself. I might have promotionals. I might have a pricing part of the system. I might have certain things the org provides as value to the things it builds to its customer. EA is mapping out that landscape and then working with IT to know who owns that, who's building out those services and systems. In my mind, when product needs something, they're already aligned to those teams that are managing that. So they would go work with the solutions architect and they'd work with the group that is doing out pricing or promotional or product information, or like they wouldn't go back to EA for that. It would be the responsibility of those technical teams to go back to EA and say, look, we're hindered to solve this problem because we don't have a tool we need or we don't have something else. And then that would kind of be the flow. I think the problem that we see a lot today is that most organizations are still having EA as a static, siloed, structured, hierarchical type of a group, right? And it's following old school thought processes. They're still waterfall. We hear, what is it called? Ivory Tower, right? It's an ivory tower group. And that is causing the frustrations for everyone else, is because they're trying to work on a pattern or a process that was from 20 years ago now.
Yeah. And I agree. But I would go back to, kind of what you said there a second ago is I would expect the product people to be able to align with the technical owners of these things. And I guess the point that I would make there is no technical owner for a lot of these things. Because
correct. And that's one of the problems I've seen in most organizations that I go help today for, my consulting that I'm doing lately is I talk to organizations, and most of the time when I say, did you do capability mapping to get a good picture of what your org looks like today and the features and functionality so you can align it back to teams, and then change your formats of teams for more like team topology where you actually have ownership and you're driving certain things. Yeah. I look like I stepped on their cat's tail. Like, what is that? Like, that sounds awesome. Like, tell me more, And I think that's one of the things that makes this harder for like what you're saying, which then causes the frustrations for these teams in an organization. We're hiring new people to do the product stuff, but we're not empowering them with the environment that we have.
Yeah. Because what I see in a lot of organizations is essentially tech leads are becoming the technical owner for a given service. And those services are tending to be much smaller these days than they ever were before. And you now have all of this coordination that needs to happen across all of these different services and the concept of a solution has become very murky, or at least the old definition of a solution has become murky. Yeah. And maybe if you change that and say like, okay, well, you own now like the definition of products. Like, what does a product mean from a retail perspective and in a technology perspective? Like, if you were to modify that, like, okay, well, now this is the person that owns the enterprise solution for products or orders or whatever the hell.
I would still decouple the experience layer and the services layer.
100%. You have to. Those cannot be linked anymore because it's a one-to-many. If they're one-to-one, you can link them. But as soon as they become one-to-many, you now have this really murky link.
Right. So I'd want... The way that I think of it, and this is off the cuff in our discussion, but it's not different than many discussions we've had with people, right? Is I want a product owner on the service itself. So if we stay with the retail thing and I say a pricing system, my pricing should be consistent for a customer. So you shouldn't go online and get a different price and different information than you're getting when you're in the store or somewhere else, unless there's a reason for it. And then we document it on there so you understand. Like if you're buying something in an airport and it costs more money, it's because you're buying it in an airport and you're paying for basically the shipping and handling of me getting that thing into the airport. So I want consistency. If I look at that group that owns that from a technical standpoint, as if they're a small business, they're a startup. Mm-hmm. And then in that startup, their product are the services they provide. So now they actually have a product mindset with a design mindset underneath to support it. And now they build out the things they need. EA is still grabbing guardrails. So as an organization, we're building with some consistency, but the team is working autonomous to provide the right services with an understanding that if you don't do your job and your services are terrible, I'm going to go get an external vendor. So now you're competing with the external vendors. You're not competing internal. It also changes the way people think about the job. It changes the way we work as an innovative organization, because now I can also look at that group and I can give them incentives to do better with what they're doing. They're not just getting a paycheck and hoping for a bonus at the end of the year. If I say you're doing a pricing system, and if you help us to create the right services in an organization through the product ask, which would be then products, now this is going to seem weird, right? Product ask for my front end product, asking back end services product for certain things. And together we map out features. If I can show that I help the organization get a 10% increase in revenue, then that group that created those services within the organization should get an extra incentive for something from that. Maybe it's a percentage of something. Maybe it's extra time off. Maybe it's whatever. Like, incentivize those teams to work as a business and have ownership per se in the things they're driving as a business. And we change the way that all these groups work together. They're working together towards a common goal again, instead of each of these things being siloed groups, right, working against each other. And I know I'm on a soapbox, but I really, it's a topic I've thought of for many years that I think would change the way we work as IT as a whole in some ways inside of an organization. Yeah,
I agree. And I think this is, we've been beating around the bush for a while now, but I think this is where we officially need to start calling out domain-driven design.
Yeah, it is part of it. Yeah.
And, we didn't just jump straight to domain-driven design because we wanted to at least lead up to this to help understand this. But really in the end, you've already mentioned team topologies, and, kind of domain-driven design falls under there. And, when I think of, there's so many organizations that don't think about domains.
Yeah.
They don't think about how to put these things together because, as I've talked about before, it's like, well, yeah, you have these separate, kind of systems or solutions. Well, that whole, kind of product architecture to me is a business piece, but solution architecture has now really become domain architecture. And we just keep creating new words. But if you think about a solution as a domain, you now can say, well, I have a, enterprise architecture is helping to connect everything, but you can now for your domain have a, kind of a product person that is helping to drive and be that domain kind of entry point.
Right.
And they would work together with EAs. They would work together with other domains and figure out, okay, well, you want this entry point into my domain that maybe, products or orders or whatever. Yeah. Now they can figure out how do you connect all the systems underneath, but that helps to encapsulate things in a way that starts to make a lot of sense.
Well, how you have, and I agree with what you're saying. Sorry.
You better be sorry.
Yeah, I am. Sometimes I'm really sorry. Sometimes I'm only kind of sorry. Sorry. And sometimes I'm sorry. I'm sorry. When you look at the Agile Manifesto and they have 4 primary bullets, the way you should think differently. I think EA needs its own version of some of that, right? So instead of enforcing rules and being like this, the buck stops here kind of group, it needs to be coaching. How often do we have organizations that are looking for guidance and coaching for these technical teams? And maybe some of our EAs, many of them might not be able to do this, right? Because they don't have the skill sets, because maybe they came into EA from a business focused group or something else, and they're not IT. Do not have a non-technical person trying to tell technical groups what to do. You will have more stress than you need. Because I myself as a technologist will not listen to somebody who has not gone through the same mud. You don't understand the job. And unfortunately, that's a real thing for any role in IT, right? If that's why PMs and architects don't get along, is you have a PM telling an architect what they need to do to make the team go faster or to build something, or God forbid you tell me because you read in an article something about an architecture and I should use X. That is just so rude, right? But my point where I'm going is coaching over enforcing. If your EA group focuses on getting them the right tools and teaching the teams how to use the tools effectively. So like you said, if I'm doing Kafka, help me put it in. Help me as an organization learn how to use it. What are the best principles and practices and patterns and things I can use to use it so that all the teams can leverage it? Because most of the time we put a tool in and we say everybody should use it, but we don't give people time to learn it and we don't help them to learn it. We don't give them templates, accelerators. We don't give them anything to make them effective with the tool itself, which then causes frustration, right?
Well, I think you make a really good point there. And, to me, enterprise architecture should be doing exactly what you're saying. And the answer to that on the technology side is really platform engineering. And, okay, well, if enterprise architecture is saying that these are the patterns that we want to, this is the capabilities we need to solve from a business perspective. These are the high level patterns and architecture that we want to be able to follow. Then platform engineering and a platform engineering group should be doing exactly what you're talking about. Hey, here's the technical implementation of, managed Kafka. Here's a technical implementation for X, Y, and Z capability from a technology perspective. And, and then another good aspect of good platform engineering is another layer of product management that says, if we are going to have managed Kafka, here is a way and a person that can own this particular capability, understand the needs of the general development community, and then work with kind of enterprise architecture and everybody else to better define what that looks like. And I think that pattern is really good.
Well, to your point there, right, and we've done this for clients, but put a Tiger team together that works for the EA group, and their job is to go around the organization and help all the other groups to implement the tools and learn how to use them. And we basically do enablement inside your own organization. So take some people that understand the tool sets and then go around and help enable your IT organization. And I don't mean like learning how to use online documentation tools. I mean like actually using technical, real tools. Because then again, because there's again a difference between coaching and mentoring, right? I want EA to coach and guide. It doesn't mean they don't have to know how to do it. Put this team in place that knows how to do these things.
Well, and I would say that team would be a part of that platform engineering group.
Correct. They might
here is the set of tools
by EA, let's say, but yes, they work as part of that larger platform.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I mean,
and that's the because I totally agree. You go back and you think about the like embedded DevOps and that kind of thing, like that came from a good spot, but having that be full-time, like I think is a bad idea. But, having that group, that kind of bullpen you were talking about inside of your platform engineering team to say, hey, like, are you a new team? Do you have this kind of challenge or problem? Yep. We can airdrop in somebody for you for a week or 2 weeks or whatever to help you get up to speed with this new type of thinking,
right?
Making sure that, you're not struggling and fighting through it. And then, you should be good to go.
Right. It's a team onboarding, right? Or it's a project onboarding process. How many organizations have we going to do work in that the onboarding process for a consulting team could take 3 months because everything inside is so just disconnected and difficult to do. And I know some of the ones I've worked on, probably you too. We ended up that our first project was helping them fix their onboarding process and getting it from 3 months to like 2 days because they had to change the whole thing so they could actually be effective because it was affecting them internally as well as external vendors. And how much money were they losing just because of that? This team would help fix that,
That's right. Well, and it's to me, the way you get to there, because I totally agree, the way you get to there is by having a good organizational structure, because all of that sounds great, but you need, you need to have all of those pieces there because, you need to have good product managers from a business side product perspective to understand the true needs. You need to have some kind of enterprise architecture or you end up with freaking chaos.
Right.
You need to have, kind of your platform team to be able to say, here's a set of tools and capabilities that we want to offer. That lowers the fragmentation you see across the ecosystem that makes onboarding easier. And all of it really all ties together. And without kind of rethinking a lot of that, you're going to have a lot of serious challenges because I've seen platform teams stand up new products or new services, and nobody cares and nobody uses them.
Yeah.
It's because there's no other structure that says this is what you should be thinking, this is what you should be doing. And we've been working with a client here recently that has fallen victim of this exact problem. They have no real organizational structure when it comes to architecture or systems and patterns and those kinds of things. And what you see is everything. When you look across their ecosystem, you find literally everything and that is a huge challenge.
Well, yeah, for many reasons, right? Whether it's actually cost of some of this stuff, whether it's standardization, even hiring, because now you have skill set issues. So if I truly allow anarchy on my tech stacks, then my hiring and the amount of time I have to spend in hiring and training and everything else, it's off the charts. And then even worse, if I need to move people between teams, I can't, right? One of the things Jack Welch gave for GE, I thought was great. And he was one of the pioneers for taking people from one team, putting them on another team for a couple months so they could learn. And I think that's something we talked about in IT in the past when we had full stack developers and everything else and a little bit more flexibility because tech stacks had less tools. But it's something we still should be doing. We still should be allowing people to go work and do a different role. Right? I'd love to have people who are less technical try to come to a basic technical role and have the ability in an organization to allow them to see it, because we don't learn something till we try it. I don't want you to be an expert at it, but I want you to understand. So the next time a developer says to a project manager, I have X, Y, and Z stopping me, like I can't get this done, the PM has spent 2 weeks pair programming with that developer to see what it really feels like as a developer, and now goes, okay, I get it. Let me help you, instead of, I don't believe you. I'm just going to change your story points and we'll just get this thing done. So you have to do whatever to get this done by Friday. Like, these silly things need to stop, and it has to be from empathy, right? But this is a whole nother chat we could go do. But
absolutely,
I do think, and I like the idea of that clarity. Now, the point you brought up earlier, which is just one I want to bring back a little bit, is that capability modeling is business capability. It allows back to domain-driven design. There's 3 components at these 3 levels. So it's the business capability mapping, domain-driven design, right? And then the product architecture. And I think there was one other thing you said. Topologies, right? It's realigning your, we call it culture nowadays, but it's really aligning your teams and ways of working. And right, it's people, processes, and technology really is still the main core of how you have to look at some of this stuff. And I think it's important. So I don't think from our conversation here that product replaces EA, but I do think they have to learn to work together better.
Well, and I think maybe that statement gets changed to enterprise architecture needs to change.
Yeah.
And engineering needs to be product led. And, and that can be done through domain-driven design and everything else.
Yeah, it's
and team topologies, right? Because you need those supporting teams, you need the streamline teams, and if you have your EA group, and then you have your domains, and the EA group is going to be working with your domains to help with that broader systems architecture. But then you have your kind of domain architecture underneath that. You have product people involved. You have all of the people to help curate these systems. Yeah. And because one of the things that I've seen happen at a lot of organizations is the concept, and this has been bastardized, but there's the concept of you build it, you run it. And which, just like the Agile Manifesto, the people that were saying that originally had a point, and it's been just twisted and turned and whatever.
Yeah.
And in a lot of areas, I've seen people say, oh, well, we don't need enterprise architecture or those kinds of things. Basically the teams themselves will figure out the right architecture. And what you end up with there is anarchy and chaos, because there is nobody helping to structure things from that broader perspective.
Yeah. Well, even a different set of eyes. People hire us as consultants just so you have a different point of view. It's my quote I always use, right? A fish doesn't know it's in water. If a team only sees what the team sees and only has a certain level of knowledge, they're not thinking out of the box after a while. They're just stressed and trying to get things done. Having that EA team or the product team or somebody from the business who's going to work. My past careers, I actually had some really amazing people from just the business side that were willing to come sit with IT at the time and help us brainstorm and see it from a business view. And this was before all these roles. And it was, so much simpler in so many ways. And we would just get together and we whiteboard it out and come up with really good stuff. And then our team would go off and build it. There's so we reduced a lot of the layers in the middle. I think sometimes there's things we need to learn from the past and bring back to the future. We create roles and jobs sometimes that just, they destroy the effectiveness of a large organization, where when we go back and look at a startup, right, there, again, things to learn from a startup, how we can keep moving fast. And I'm not saying we need anarchy, like you said, but a logical understanding of how each of these groups or how each of these components is supporting itself.
Well, and I think that's the big difference between a startup and an enterprise. A startup, your domain might be a person.
Right.
It's like, oh, well, Nancy wrote the payment system. So if you have a problem with the payment system, go talk to Nancy.
Right.
Well, when you scale that up to an enterprise perspective, Nancy's now a whole team of people, or potentially multiple teams of people. And the coordination of that becomes a lot harder. And if you don't think about it from a domain perspective, you have no one to go talk to.
And so the interesting point in it is, does it really change, or did we change the perception because it's scaled? And that's where I say mini startup, like businesses inside of a business, because she might have a team now, but they're still providing me the same services. They're just scaling the services.
That's right.
So if I continue to look at that module within the design of an organization, can I continue to get the same services? They just scale to what the organization needs. But why does that mean I have to add 3 layers of this and 2 layers of this? And now they have to go through a ticketing system for me to ask to do work with them. And we add complexity sometimes, not realizing that we're adding complexity. That's all.
Yeah. Well, and that is the secondary problem, because even if you were to say, okay, well, now Nancy is now a domain, but Nancy's job is now changed significantly, where
her job would, yeah.
It's like, okay, well, now I am trying to manage this domain, and I need to have a set of APIs. I need to understand my inputs and outputs. I need to understand what's upstream and downstream for me, and contracts and all of the other things that kind of come along with it. And, that is a much more difficult job, because you have many people that are reliant upon you, in many different groups and many different, all these other things that are reliant upon you. And so it's now her job to understand all of those things and to be able to build a solution that can work with all of them and not turn into this bloated, gigantic thing that is just a behemoth.
Yeah. And then taking that back to where we are, because there's a whole really good discussion on here we could do for another hour or two, because I love this topic. I think to your point, then that's where it is important as it scales to have these groups like we're talking about, but working together and not in silos, right? So EA and PA and, our development teams and our solutions architects, and then them figuring out. So the coexistence of the teams is important, as well as the collaboration between these groups is really important. We're not saying do more. We're saying be clear on certain things. Like we said, it could be the capability modeling. It could be the domain driven design. It could be the feature sets and the feature architecture for the products we're building, so that I can align all of these things. It's the simplification of my platform I'm building. Give me a platform and consistency, right, that I'm going to be able to go and build all these products off of. So I'm not reinventing the wheel every time I do it. And I think these are some really, really key points that I have come out of our discussion here. I don't know if we came back to the same page and both agree, but I know we agree enough on a lot of these components that at the end of the day, we would solve the problem.
I honestly think we are agreeing. And, we can kind of end this with a good example that we've actually brought up before. But, I think Threads is a great example of how all of this can tie together, because they've understood their kind of back-end architecture. They've understood the given domains that need to happen, whether it's from logins or all of the other kind of services and domains that are behind kind of Instagram. And when it came to building that new product, they already had a good architecture. They already had these kind of domains and the solutions that they provide. And all they really needed to do was figure out, what is this new set of capability? What is this new, kind of, end user face going to look like? And they were able to do that very quickly. And the reason they were able to do that very quickly is because they had this level of thinking to be able to tie it together.
Yeah.
And,
yep.
like the retail example we had earlier, you can tie your in-person and online presence together by thinking about these things as a singular domain problem, by thinking about team topologies and how you can have these supporting teams and everything else in platform engineering. And like that to me is the modern way of thinking about things and getting rid of the chaos that can come from an organization and get everyone swimming in the same direction.
Yeah. As well as it makes people happier if the environment is not causing them stress. Mm-hmm. If I can work as a developer per se, right? Or even a team, if I have the ability to know that tomorrow when you ask me for something new, I have a toolbox full of things I need and I can go grab what I need and just start working the problem. I don't have to go through a lot of the other headaches of reinventing the wheel. I'm going to be happier. I'm going to work better. And I'm going to create a better product at the end of the day. So all these things lead to productivity and happiness and things that end up helping the organization in the long term, no matter what, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I know we had like 6 pages of notes and I don't think we went through a quarter of what we were talking about, but if people are interested in this, we could absolutely dig deeper into some of these, but I think this was a really fascinating conversation.
Yeah. I would definitely like for our community to jump back into chat and share a little bit more with us like they always do. And what is their point of view on some of this? Where are they having the biggest pains? Have they dealt with EA? Are they in the EA group and they're having their own problems? Do they agree with us or are we actually crazy and do they disagree with us?
Well, I would definitely say we're crazy, but how far out there on the edge are we at any given point?
Exactly. So, and did they think of something that we haven't even thought of? Like that would be great. So yeah, I definitely appreciated this conversation. This was great, Chris.
Yeah, it's a pleasure as always, man.
Thank you, my friend.
Later.
Cheers.